I hope you were watching Newzroom Afrika Channel 405 last night. If you weren't, you missed a very interesting and frankly strange set of events. So, there was a series of statements being traded back and forth between the Presidency and the Tourism Minister Lindiwe Sisulu. First, the Presidency said that Sisulu had apologized and retracted her comments that black judges were mentally colonized. Then, she issued a statement saying she had not retracted the statement and stood by every word she had penned. The Presidency wasn't done. It said it stood by its earlier statement. But wait, there was more to come. This morning, Sisulu issued another statement saying she was now blaming the Presidency's media team for issuing the first statement. Well, we're joined now by the analyst Angelo Fick and the Executive Director of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, Lawson, Naidoo. Good afternoon to you both. Angelo, let me start with you. Good afternoon. I mean, there are all sorts of words we can use to describe this, but I keep coming back to the word farce.
Yes, and, beyond fast pantomime, that this is actually becoming quite pathetic. It's the sublime being reduced to the ridiculous. We are supposedly discussing constitutional matters and the separation of church and state and party and government, and ministerial capacity and personal capacity, but none of these things are really what is going on here. That this is an ANC election here, and people are firing their first salvos shortly after the January 8th statement, presumably to advance their own ambitions. And here I think ambition trumped a certain amount of logic and a certain amount of understanding and literacy of structure, and a certain amount of, should we say, separation of polemic from argument.
It seems that Lindiwe Sisulu is, I think, defying the President. Now, I mean, that might be a contested view, but let me put the question to you like this, Angelo. Do you think she wants to be fired?
I don't know if she wants to be fired, because then she wouldn't have issued her statement on ministerial letterhead. This idea that people who inhabit positions or sit in positions in cabinet can pen things in their personal capacity is something that I think we need to disabuse ourselves of in South Africa. The ministers of state, when they make public remarks, affect our perception of policy. And so this spat might read to some people like some kind of Crystal versus Alexis dynasty catfight inside the cabinet. But actually there are real consequences for the manner of challenge to not just the separation of powers, but to individual judges who may not be named but are suddenly identified. And for Sisulu to then claim that there are ad hominem, or in her case ad feminam, attacks on her subsequent to these statements is ridiculous, when she actually started the attacks on people and their integrity. And basically pretended that there isn't a system in place of checks and balances to make sure that the different branches of government hold checks on one another, and that there are other means to pursue a critique of judges and of their appointment and of their work through the Judicial Services Commission or through the parliamentary oversight committees, or a variety of other mechanisms she could have followed, rather than a newspaper article, which was really just rhetoric with very little logic and a very poor, what Margaret Macmillan calls, abuse of history.
Lawson, Naidoo, the attitude of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, CASAC, to all of this. You previously said the President should take action. He then did issue the statement last night, and then, of course, there was the response, the rejoinder by Lindiwe Sisulu, the Tourism Minister. Lawson, Naidoo, what do you think the President should do now?
Well, Stephen, as Angelo has just said, this was a clear act of defiance by the Minister against the statement issued by the President. And, if that was not an accurate reflection of the meeting that the Minister had with the President, then she should have taken the matter up with the Presidency rather than respond by issuing, further public statements and comments. And, I think the situation is now completely untenable, and the President literally has no choice but to dismiss her from Cabinet.
If she's fired, I mean, won't there be political consequences? If she's not fired, won't there be political consequences to that too? It may make the President look weak.
Well, exactly, and I think, it's not just the political consequences for the President in making him look weak and vulnerable, but it's the political consequences about the issues that have been raised, that, a minister can go on the offensive and launch a scurrilous attack against the integrity of members of the judiciary, and despite being called to order by the President, can simply get away with it. So I think that, the stakes are very high on both levels. And I think the President, in order to preserve the integrity of Cabinet and the integrity of the judiciary, needs to now act.
Angelo, Fick, I mean, what does it tell us that if it is the case that this is related to the ANC leadership election, and I agree with that analysis, I think it must be, what does it tell us that someone who wants to achieve a certain leadership goal in the governing party does so by attacking the Constitution and by attacking judges and using, and I think there's no way around this, using such insulting language towards judges?
Well, populism is a strange place to be. You know, if you wish to inflame feelings, if you wish to exploit already aggrieved senses of being excluded, there are ways that are very obvious to go about doing so. But what's also interesting is that this is a very long-standing member of the NEC, has been in various portfolios in government, and barely 2 weeks after the January 8th statement of the party that she belongs to, you know, in which there's calls for discipline and for people to, you know, think about unity, this kind of conduct follows. And as Lawson points out, this really does force the hand not just of the President of the Republic of South Africa, but the President of the party, and the NEC itself has to think about what does it mean when people defy, you know, the structures and orders and hierarchies of government. Can they continue to serve, as we were told 3 or 4 years ago, at the pleasure of the president, who can appoint or disappoint? And the question is Cyril Ramaphosa miffed enough? Is he, you know, rattled enough to know that this is actually a case for him to dismiss this person precisely because you cannot have members of your cabinet defy you in public in the ways that this minister has, without consequence, because, you know, what you sit with in an election here in your party is disarray and the opening up of people challenging you on other fronts.
Lawson, I mean, within all of this is the sort of, why do people keep attacking judges? And I mean, this is a politician being quite insulting towards judges. Now judges are sort of the playing field for this. You know, they're the sort of playing field for this political fight. Are you expecting more of this? If the president doesn't act, are we going to have more attacks on judges this year, Lawson?
Well, I don't think so, Stephen. I think the acting Chief Justice Zondo has come out, made a very strong statement in response to the minister's initial statement. And I think it's now up to the presidency to deal with this issue. I don't think it would now be appropriate for the acting Chief Justice to re-enter the arena. He's made very clear his dissatisfaction with the comments from the minister, and the ball is now firmly in the president's court. I don't think we can expect or should expect any further interaction from the judiciary.
Angelo, there's a bigger issue in our society, surely, and I'm afraid to say that this is probably a theme that we're going to return to throughout the year, which is that of all of the energy going into statements and all of the energy into, no doubt, thinking of rebuttals and writing pieces and opinion pieces, none of this fixes one pothole or fixes one traffic light, does it? I mean, this is the problem that maybe we're faced with now in South Africa. So let me put it to you this way. Is it becoming an increasing problem that the elites fight with each other and don't fight to try and help our society?
I think partly to call this a fight is to aggrandize something that is quite absurdly silly. I mean, you use the word farce. I'm thinking of Njabulo Ndebele's caution a generation ago that we should really not be pamphleteering, you know, the future, and we shouldn't be sloganeering politics. And I'm afraid that in these back and forth spats between people who supposedly are on the same side, you know, that really is kind of sloganeering very, very weighty matters. Some of the issues that Minister Sisulu, or Ms. Sisulu, in her personal capacity, raises in her original opinion piece really are significant issues that should be addressed. That she has been sitting in government for the last generation, and that as a member of that government is now blaming that government for not addressing these issues smacks of the highest irony. And so this idea that, you know, these elites are simply spatting between one another and neglecting the real business of their work, that's one view. But the other view is the quality of the spat is an indication of the trouble that we're in. These are not people who are actually debating substantial issues. They're just firing off rhetorical salvos against one another, and some of them are more substantial and some of them are less substantial. Minister Sisulu's responses, and, you know, you can tell this from who she quotes, under what circumstances and with what effect, you know, is to knit together something that supposedly is an argument. But, you know, I was once paid by the taxpayer to read hundreds of these kinds of sophomoric attempts at arguments, and they're not arguments. They're really polemics, and they're polemics that really only work if you ignore history and its lessons, if you ignore the substance of the reality that we live in, and then you can stitch these things together in the poorly knitted materials that we've been subjected to so far. And quite frankly, many of us this early in the year would rather read other things that are far more intellectually stimulating and challenging than to read ministerial statements on letterheads or opinion pieces penned for websites that used to be newspapers that really have very little merit to begin with.
Lawson, Angelo, Fick, the analyst, thank you very much indeed. Lawson, Naidoo from the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. I really do appreciate the time. Thank you.